height of its popularity, Chippendales' exotic male dance troupe played to sell out crowds. People across the country shelled out millions to see them. Then one of the founding partners was murdered, and New York City police were left with no leads. When a suspect finally did emerge, the chase would take the FBI to another continent in the hopes of solving the Backstage murder.
In the 1980s, two partners created a nightclub that would bring them wealth and international fame. The male strip club phenomenon promised female patrons fun and excitement, but the bright lights hid a dark side. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI would launch a sting operation spanning 2 continents to bring down a man who killed for profit.
New York City is famous for its show business tradition. Within a 4-block radius of Times Square, hundreds of offices are rented by producers looking for their next hit. One such place was on the 15th floor of a building on West 40th Street. In 1987, it was home to Unicorn Productions. Nick DeNoia was its founder and president. Curiously, the 5-time Emmy Award-winning children's television producer became best known as the producer and vice president of Chippendales, the exotic male dancers. On April 7th, 1987, he was gunned down.
Nick.
A colleague heard the shot. He found DeNoia dead on the floor and called 911.
May I help you?
Oh, yes. A man has just been shot in my office.
Hold on, please. I have to connect you with the ambulance service.
Oh, please.
Certainly.
Emergency vehicles arrived moments later. NYPD crime technicians gathered evidence. They recovered a shell casing from a 9mm automatic weapon. DeNoia's colleague told homicide detective Michael Geddes that a strange man had entered the office just prior to the shooting.
He said maybe about a half hour ago, or 45 minutes ago, somebody came into the office and said to him, "Are you Nick?" And he said, "No, Nick is in the other office, and he's busy right now."
Without looking up from his work, the associate pointed the man to DeNoia's office. He never saw the stranger's face. The witness told detectives that moments later, he noticed the same man in the bathroom.
While he was in the bathroom, he heard this guy leaving the bathroom, and a couple of seconds later, he heard the door to his office open up. And then he heard a gunshot.
The last sound the witness heard was the exit door to the stairwell swing open, then close. Detective Geddes traced the killer's path, hoping to find something along the way that would point to his identity.
I took down the route that I thought that the shooter might have taken to see if there was any evidence or anything. And I ran down the 15 floors, I believe it was. And when I got down to the end, there was 2 exits. One would lead to the lobby area, one would lead to the freight elevator area. So I exited out of the freight elevator area, then came back in and exited out of the lobby area just to get a feel for the scene.
On the ground floor, detectives investigated the freight area. They dusted for prints, but were unable to lift any that were usable. The freight elevator operator had seen a man run through the door and out to the street. He recalled that the suspect wore jeans and had dark hair.
He also gave us the exit of how the fella came out of the building as he exited the building on 40th Street, and when he came out, he made a left towards 8th Avenue.
Upstairs, two city detectives arrived with Nick DeNoya's brother Val from New Jersey to identify the body. The men had been close. Val was devastated by the sight of his murdered brother. Afterwards, Val DeNoya came to the precinct to help investigators in any way he could. Nick's brother wanted the case solved as soon as possible. Detective Geddes hoped Val knew something that could provide a solid lead.
Being a detective, one of the hardest things to do is to tell somebody, you know, that, hey, we're not going to be able to solve this case right away unless you know something that can help us. And I explained to him at that time, I said, look, if it was something that happened here in the New York area, maybe it was a business relationship here, or a relationship, a love relationship, or some kind of emotional type of relationship, we have a good shot of solving that crime right away.
For Val DeNoya, one name came to mind: his brother's business partner, Steve Banerjee. Banerjee had known Nick DeNoya since the early 80s. Val told the detective that his brother met him in Los Angeles. Nick DeNoya had traveled to LA hoping to build upon the success he enjoyed in New York. The five-time Emmy Award-winning producer fielded many offers, but one man in particular was relentless in his pursuit. Steve Banerjee, the East Indian immigrant and entrepreneur who had dreamt up Chippendales' male exotic dance revue, wanted DeNoya to fashion a more refined act. Though ladies-only nights in LA were extremely popular, Banerjee wanted a dance troupe worthy enough to draw audiences in New York and Las Vegas. He believed that Nick DeNoya was the man who could make that dream come true. Val DeNoya said that his brother was reluctant at first, feeling the act was too sleazy. When Banerjee promised him all touring rights and 50% of its proceeds, DeNoya accepted the offer. Nick polished the routine and booked the troupe at Club Magique in New York. The newly styled Chippendales dancers became an instant hit. But shortly after his success, Val told the detective that Nick's relationship with Banerjee had soured. Banerjee demanded a larger percentage of the touring profits, but Nick refused to give in.
They were always constantly arguing, and they were arguing about different ends of the business, and, you know, it's just like regular business partners, you know, but they were having trouble. And DeNoya was starting to take his troupe out, and he was going to form a new business.
He was doing very well.
In the weeks prior to his death, Nick was negotiating touring deals for a troupe he designed to compete directly with Chippendales. Stealing market share from Chippendales could cost Banerjee millions. Val offered the detectives his brother's financial records. NYPD set up surveillance at Nick DeNoya's funeral since detectives suspected he'd been murdered by someone he knew. Nick's brother would help identify as many mourners as possible. Nick's partner, Steve Banerjee, was among those who paid their respects. The following day, investigators phoned Banerjee in California to inquire about his relationship with his late partner. For Detective Geddes, the interview had a subtler agenda than fact-finding.
We were trying to get what we call a negative interview, you know, where if he says, no, I had nothing to do with it, we were great friends, and things like that, just to try to disprove things that were starting to be said, so if later on it was involved with him, we could just tie it all together.
You know, it's, like I said to you, it's
Banerjee
a real
never
pity.
contradicted what police already knew.
You know,
He acknowledged that he and Denoya did not get along and admitted that he was upset that his partner had formed a new dance troupe.
Someone who could verify that for you.
any help that I can do, officer.
Banerjee added that on April 7th, the day of the murder, he had been in Los Angeles the entire day.
Yeah, you know.
That did not rule out the possibility that a hitman had been hired.
Thank you very much.
But detectives had nothing to prove it. The Denoya family offered a substantial reward for anyone who came forward with information. Police received several calls, but none panned out.
We always felt this fellow, Steve Banerjee, had something to do with it, but nobody could really give us any concrete evidence or even steer us in the direction of where we could tie anybody into what happened.
Lacking any other leads, the freight elevator
Dark hair.
operator from Denoya's building provided his description of the man he saw run from the stairwell. Though he had seen him only briefly, police hoped it would be enough to prompt someone else's memory.
Pretty much.
Police canvassed the lobby of Denoya's office building well into the evening. They asked everyone who worked there if they recognized the sketch. None did. The killer had apparently vanished in the middle of a workday amongst millions of New York City commuters.
Well, basically, the investigation just, it kind of hit a brick wall. And we really weren't going anywhere with it. We had a sketch that was out there. There was a reward that was out there. There was we even put it on television, trying to get some assistance, figuring if, the person that did this was from another state, that somebody would give us the information. But we constantly hit that brick wall, and it wasn't going anywhere.
No new leads surfaced. To New York City police, it looked as if the killer had gotten away with murder. Four years had passed since Chippendales choreographer Nick Denoya had been murdered in his Manhattan office. The case remained unsolved. Then, in July 1991, over 2,500 miles away, Special Agent Dan West at the FBI's Las Vegas field office received a call. It was from a man who claimed he had been hired to kill two people for $25,000.
I immediately wasn't sure whether or not he was just a prank call. It's not unusual for the FBI, especially in Las Vegas on a weekend, to receive prank calls, a lot of alcohol flowing. So I asked him to give me specific details of the alleged planned murder.
The caller said that a man named Ray Cologne had hired him to kill two managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. They were competitors of the Chippendales dancers. The source said he did not know why Cologne wanted the men dead, but for some reason the would-be hitman had decided not to go through with it.
I'm not sure if the source backed out because of Good Samaritan reasons or because he chickened out. He flew to England and then flew back to the United States almost immediately. I think he flew into Los Angeles and then drove to Las Vegas, basically to hide out.
The agent told the source to meet him at the office at 5 o'clock the next morning. He needed to somehow confirm the caller's story.
He also said that he had worked with the DEA in prior investigations as an informant, and he provided me with the name of a DEA agent in Houston who could vouch for him.
The DEA agent confirmed that he had previously worked with the source and insisted that the man was to be trusted. After the FBI arranged protection for the intended victims in England, the informant described the murder plan. Preparations were made a few days earlier at the Los Angeles home of his former landlord, Ray Cologne, the man who had hired him. Cologne led the would-be hitman to his garage, where they met Cologne's brother-in-law, who had recently returned from scouting the victims in England.
Look, man, we want this
He told the informant that he could find his targets in the town of Blackpool on July 20th, when the exotic dancers were scheduled to perform there. Because of England's strict gun laws, smuggling a gun in was out of the question. Instead, Cologne instructed the hitman to kill his victims by fatal injection. He mixed a dose of cyanide powder into a small vial. They figured it could be smuggled past customs in a bottle of eye drops. The agent needed something more solid than the statement of one informant to bring in Ray Cologne. He consented to get Cologne on tape. The reformed hitman would call Cologne and pretend that he was still in England.
What we were trying to get from the telephone conversations was strong evidence that Cologne was a part of the plan to kill the two intended victims, if not the organizer of the plan. We had the information from the source, but we had to verify that through the tape conversations.
Hello? Ray!
Yeah.
Barry, buddy! Are you sure that damn stuff is gonna work? It's pretty red, buddy.
Yeah, it'll work.
Man, I don't want to...
But, and if you want to add something to it...
How long is it going to take before they croak and hit down? Is that an immediate, if not sooner?
Yeah, right. That's probably potent. You can even put a little, if you want, a little Drano in there if you want.
Well, it's going to kill them right away then, huh? Okay.
It was evident from the beginning that Ray Cologne was not only a participant in this murder-for-hire scheme, but that he was actually the director of it. Cologne provided numerous suggestions to the source on how to best effect the death of these two intended victims.
What wasn't evident from the recordings was a motive for killing two managers of an exotic male dance troupe.
Do you know who hired Cologne?
During the conversations, Cologne had made reference to a third man who was providing money for the double murder. But the informant told Agent West that he did not know the man's name. 2 days later, on Wednesday, July 25th, 1991, a federal judge in California was convinced that the FBI had enough probable cause to search Cologne's Los Angeles home. Cologne was surprised by the warrant. It limited the agent's search to cyanide, travel records to England, and correspondence that could link Cologne and his brother-in-law to the intended murder. In the bedroom, they found flyers for the male exotic dance tour in England.
Harry, let me have a bag, will you?
They also found 2 handguns in a drawer. Records indicated they had been legally purchased by Ray Cologne. And since the warrant didn't specify weapons, the guns were not seized. In the garage, agents did find something the warrant had specified. A bag filled with cyanide. It corroborated their informant's story.
This is what he was talking about.
Then, one agent found something that would break the case wide open.
During the course of the search warrant, we found Cologne's address book. Special Agent Andy Stefanik from the Los Angeles office was going through that book, and he noticed the name of Steve Banerjee.
Agent West also discovered that Steve Banerjee, the well-known Los Angeles owner of Chippendales nightclub, had called Cologne recently.
The toll record showed several conversations, several calls going back and forth between Banerjee and Cologne. In addition, that same day, we received the results of interviews from the British police on the intended victims, and both indicated that Steve Banerjee was the only person they could possibly think of who would have a motive to kill them or would even want to kill them.
The 2 managers of the rival male dance troupe believed that Banerjee wanted them dead to stop them from competing with Chippendales. This was the same motive that New York authorities suspected was behind the murder of Banerjee's former business partner, Nick DeNoia. Agents called New York City homicide detective Michael Geddes to find out more about the 5-year-old DeNoia murder.
All of a sudden, I got a phone call from the FBI. I really got excited at that point because it was already maybe 5 years, 5.5 years or so. So it looked like we might have the opportunity to give the family their final piece.
But neither the NYPD nor the FBI had direct evidence against Steve Banerjee. And agents were still unsure if Cologne would be able to assist the murder investigation.
We at that time did not know whether or not Cologne was involved in the Nick DeNoia murder. The composite picture resembled Cologne, but it certainly wasn't a match.
Despite their uncertainty about Cologne's role in DeNoia's murder, they had strong evidence against him for conspiracy to commit murder. Faced with stiff jail time, the FBI believed he would talk.
Cologne knew that he had to take a hit. There was no question about that. He was caught red-handed in the planning of the murder of 2 individuals. So he had to accept the fact that he was going to go down for some time himself, but that it was going to be a lot less time in jail if he worked with us.
On August 2nd, 1991, agents arrested Cologne and his brother-in-law for conspiracy to commit murder. Cologne's arrest would increase the pressure to tell the FBI what he knew about Steve Banerjee and the murder of Banerjee's partner, Nick DeNoia. What the FBI didn't count on was that Cologne's arrest would make Chippendales owner Steve Banerjee far more elusive. In August 1991, the FBI arrested Ray Cologne and his brother-in-law in Los Angeles for conspiracy to commit murder. Their 2 targets, who escaped unharmed, were managers of a male exotic dance troupe touring England. Agents believed that a 3rd man, Steve Banerjee, creator of Chippendales, had hired them to kill the men.
Watch your head.
Special Agent Dan West needed more than a hunch to arrest Banerjee. He hoped that Ray Cologne would provide something more solid.
He knew that, that his best chances of getting the best deal were to cooperate with the FBI. He had indicated to us that we only had a small fraction of the story. He took a sheet of paper, he said, right now you have this, and I can give you the whole page.
As agents had suspected, Cologne admitted that Steve Banerjee was the man who had hired him to carry out the murders. He also told agents that the wealthy Chippendales club owner had ordered the murder of his partner, Nick DeNoia, in New York 5 years before. For consideration of a lighter sentence, Cologne signed a proffer agreeing to help the FBI gather enough evidence to arrest Banerjee. Special Agent Scott Garriola from the FBI's Los Angeles field office learned that Cologne's association with Banerjee had begun by chance over a decade earlier.
Cologne had lived and managed an apartment building on the same street where Chippendales Los Angeles club was. And by being so close in proximity, he would frequent the bar and over the course of time became close friends with Banerjee.
Cologne explained that his friend Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the U.S. from India in the early 70s. In 1973, the future millionaire opened a gas station north of the Los Angeles airport. He used the profits to purchase a failing West Los Angeles bar, and by 1976 had turned it into the nightclub that became famous as Chippendales. By then, Cologne had parlayed his friendship with Banerjee into employment. The out-of-work musician was happy to perform any job that Banerjee needed done.
Right off the street.
One service Cologne provided was arson. Banerjee wanted his competitors eliminated. Colon confided that Banerjee directed him to burn down nearby competition. A disco in Santa Monica was the first target in 1979. 5 years later, Colon torched another club. Neither arson attempt had been successful, and the clubs remained open. Banerjee didn't limit his targets to buildings. According to Colon, Banerjee also ordered him to hire a hitman to kill his partner, Nick DeNoia. Colon added that DeNoia had successfully sued Banerjee to prevent him from touring a second Chippendales dance troupe. The lawsuit, combined with costly merchandising overruns, forced Banerjee to file for bankruptcy. As instructed, Colon hired a hitman 3 months earlier. He claimed he remembered only the man's first name, which was Louis. On the day of the murder, Colon and Louis flew in from LA, rented a car, and drove into Manhattan. Colon waited on the street with the engine running until Louis returned from shooting DeNoia. The following night, Colon was back in Los Angeles. In Chippendales' parking lot, Banerjee paid Colon $12,000 cash, the balance of the original $25,000 fee. Colon's story was good, but it was only hearsay from a suspected conspirator. He might say anything to serve less jail time. Special Agent Garriola first needed to verify the facts Colon had presented.
At this point, all we had was somebody in prison telling us, well, it wasn't me, it was somebody else who was behind it. Your initial plan is to corroborate as much as possible what he's telling you. And that's what we did for the first couple of months.
With Colon's credibility secured, the FBI set out to get Banerjee and the hitman who killed his partner. Agents figured the only one Banerjee would trust enough to confess to would be his old friend Ray Colon, but they needed to get Colon close enough.
We had Colon released out of the jail where he was being housed under a proposed medical furlough because of his health problems. And we started sending communications to Banerjee via letter, messenger-delivered letters, and cryptic phone calls to try and get Banerjee to respond to him.
Banerjee refused to return calls or letters. He was suspicious of Colon, despite having paid him over $200,000 at various drops around the city to keep Colon loyal since his arrest. The FBI came up with another plan to compel Banerjee to respond to Colon.
We decided to force the issue and set up a meeting on our own terms. And we had Colon waiting across the street from Chippendales one morning.
As agents watched, Colon called to Banerjee when he emerged from the club. The Chippendales owner was curious as to why Colon was standing outside his establishment. Banerjee spoke to him in whispers, suspecting he may be wired. Agents had no way of knowing what Banerjee might be planning.
We took several precautions. You know, if he hired somebody else, Colon, to kill somebody, why wouldn't he hire somebody to kill Colon?
Hoping to strengthen Banerjee's trust, the released prisoner provided the address of a bar where the suspected murderer was to send more money. Banerjee didn't trust Colon, but he couldn't afford to ignore him. He told Colon to pick up his payment the next evening. Agents set up surveillance on the bar. At about 9 o'clock, agents observed Banerjee stopping in front, checking the address, and then driving away. A short time later, a messenger delivered a package. Agents retrieved it from inside.
When we contacted the messenger company, that had sent the package. The pickup location where the package was received from was a bakery that was right next door to the building where the Chippendales dancers were practicing and rehearsing.
Back in the FBI offices, agents opened the package, not knowing what might be inside. It contained $14,000.
I guess we got them both.
The payoff meant that Banerjee would continue to keep Ray Colon close to him. But agents didn't know if Banerjee would talk, or if the hitman, known only as Louis, would ever be found. In the summer of 1992, FBI agents continued to surveil Chippendales club owner Steve Banerjee. He was suspected of ordering the murder of his partner more than 5 years earlier. Ray Colon, hired by Banerjee to arrange the murder, had been arrested and was cooperating with agents to capture the wealthy club owner. Wearing a wire, Colon met the East Indian entrepreneur at a hotel in Santa Monica, hoping to get his confession on tape. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team were stationed nearby.
Banerjee immediately motioned for Colon to join him in the men's room. When the two of them went into the men's room, and Banerjee told him to be quiet, not to say a word, he searched Colon about 3 times looking for the wire.
Agents worried about what the suspected murderer might do to Colon if he found the wire. Colon's life depended on the FBI's skills at concealment.
All right? Okay.
Banerjee never found the wire, but it was clear that he did not completely trust his longtime friend Ray Colon. Out in the lobby, Banerjee insisted they communicate through notes instead of speaking. Agents recorded only scribbles and whispers. Banerjee wanted to know how much Colon had told the FBI and what they knew about, quote, the deed. Colon knew the deed referred to the murder of Banerjee's partner. The former musician denied that he had said anything to federal agents.
Once again, we were unsuccessful in getting an audible recording due to the fact that Banerjee basically whispered throughout the whole thing and wrote notes. And when Colon would raise his voice and try and talk, Banerjee would shush him, basically, by putting his finger to his mouth and saying, no, we can't talk.
Banerjee gathered the notes and returned to the restroom, this time alone. Despite his doubts about Colon's loyalty, Banerjee handed him another payment, this time in plain view of agents. The package held $30,000, more than twice as much as the first. Unfortunately for investigators, there was nothing illegal about giving Colon cash.
On its face, it's basically a loan for attorney's fees for Colon. Without the story on tape of how Colon and Banerjee were partners in these crimes, the money basically was not going to be able to do anything for the case.
After Banerjee's Mercedes was out of sight, agents hoped to retrieve at least a portion of the notes from the meeting. In the men's room under a toilet, one agent discovered a scrap of paper. It seemed that Banerjee had flushed the rest. Though it held only a small pen mark, it would help corroborate Colon's story when it came time to testify at trial. Colon did not remember the full name of the hitman he had hired in 1987, but he did recall that his first name was Louis, and he lived somewhere in East Los Angeles.
Colon didn't have a last name for him, didn't have an address. We had took him out a couple of times, had him drive us around the area, and he pointed out a house that he thought Louis had lived in.
Colon's memory proved correct. The woman who answered the door was Louis's mother. Since she did not know Cologne, she refused to tell him where her son was. Cologne told her that he wanted to provide work for him and handed her his card. In a few days, Cologne received a call.
Unfortunately, what we came across was Louis's brother, Andy, and we had to establish a relationship with Andy to try and find out where Louis was. So we had Cologne talking to Andy about various things. He needed to hire Louis back for a job, same job he had completed a few years prior.
After about a month, Andy finally told Cologne that he could find his brother, Roberto Rivera Lopez, in Los Angeles' county prison. Rivera, whose nickname was Louis, was serving time for possession of narcotics and would be out of jail in a few months. As a heroin junkie, he would need fast cash after his release and wanted to know more about Cologne's offer.
Cologne laid the groundwork once again for this new job that he wanted Rivera to help him with. And the plan that we had set in motion was that there was a witness to the homicide in 1987, and that Louis needed to go back and take care of that witness.
Near the end of 1992, Cologne met with the hitman for the first time in 5 years. With their conversation being monitored, the FBI informant slowly drew Louis Rivera in, detailing a new murder plot. If the FBI ever hoped to get the hitman confessing on tape, it had to be now.
His release date on the charge he was incarcerated for was, I believe, January 17th of '93. We were running up against the clock. And one of our concerns was that, we had laid the groundwork for Cologne and Rivera, that when Rivera got out, he was supposed to contact Cologne to go and kill this witness.
Agents' worries were laid to rest. On Christmas Eve 1992, Rivera described his role in the murder of Nick DeNoia. At 3:30 p.m. on April 7th, 1987, Louis arrived on the 15th floor of DeNoia's building disguised as a messenger. The place was empty except for one man in the outer office. Moments later, when the office worker entered the men's room, Louis exited to kill DeNoia, figuring there'd be no other witnesses to the crime. He found the producer at his desk, pulled out a 9mm semi-automatic, and fired from 3 feet away. The FBI had it all on tape. Ray Cologne had fulfilled half of his agreement with the FBI to receive sentencing consideration on his charge of conspiracy to commit murder. The other half hinged on his ability to secure a taped confession from the man who had ordered DeNoia's murder, his longtime friend, Steve Banerjee. So far, more than a year after his arrest, Cologne had been unable to do that. By January 1993, the FBI's cooperating witness, Ray Cologne, had been unable to convince murder suspect Steve Banerjee to discuss aloud the crimes they had planned together. They had met several times, but Banerjee had been too paranoid or too clever to be recorded. At one meeting, Banerjee suggested he'd help Cologne hide out overseas. Special Agent Scott Garriola and his team used Banerjee's suggestion to form a new plan. Perhaps Banerjee could be lured overseas to talk to Cologne on foreign soil.
I don't think it was too difficult on Banerjee's part to accept the fact that Cologne was going to go overseas. I mean, he wanted to be rid of Cologne. He knew Cologne was the only person that could tie him into these various crimes dating back to 1979.
Since Cologne was still on Banerjee's payroll, agents believed it was likely that he would visit Cologne in person to be certain that Cologne had what he needed for an extended stay. Banerjee wanted Cologne out of his life permanently. The FBI selected Rome as their destination, since Italy's laws and police force are well adapted to surveillance investigations. Agents made extensive preparations before they arrived.
We acquired a phony United States passport for Cologne in an alias name, which you would expect someone who's on the run, a fugitive in another country, to have some kind of phony documentation. So we acquired that. We also entered Cologne into the nationwide crime computer as a fugitive. So in the event Banerjee had some kind of private investigator or someone check the computer, it would show that there was a warrant out for Cologne's arrest because he was now a fugitive.
With the cooperation of the Italian authorities, the FBI secured an apartment for Cologne in Rome that was wired for recording. When everyone was assembled, Cologne placed a call to Banerjee in California. The East Indian murder suspect understood that Cologne would use the code name Mr. Underwood when he called.
Yeah. Hey, this is Mr. Underwood. How you doing, Steve? So when can you come and discuss the particulars? I cannot go to Italy, but I can go to Switzerland. How about Zurich? Can you come to Zurich? No, that's impossible. Why can't you go to Italy? On no visa. Huh? It takes a month to get it.
There was a problem with Banerjee coming to Rome since he was not a United States citizen. He claimed he was not able to obtain a visa in time to enter Italy, and he wanted initially to meet us up by the Italian-Swiss border.
Banerjee finally agreed to meet Cologne in Zurich, Switzerland. The FBI had only a short time to make the new arrangements.
It was quite a challenge to get everything accomplished. Basically, this was a Friday, I believe, and it was basically one day since no one worked on a weekend back in the States. We had to get everything, all the necessary approvals for the travel, the country clearance. We had to get the U.S. Attorney's Office to contact, through a mutual legal assistance treaty, contact their counterparts in Switzerland to get the authority, the legal authority to do the consensual recordings. It was quite arduous, to say the least.
We will take...
Despite the brief turnaround time, the FBI and Swiss authorities would be ready.
Across towards the main door.
The plan was to wire Cologne for a meeting in the hotel lobby. Afterwards, the informant would suggest continuing the meeting in his hotel room, which would be equipped with audio and video devices planted by a special unit of the Swiss police. Two adjoining rooms were booked in a downtown Zurich hotel. One room they wired for picture and sound. The room next door would hold the monitoring equipment. Agents hoped that this time, their efforts would finally be rewarded with Banerjee's confession on tape. From the time of his arrival at the Zurich airport, Steve Banerjee would be under constant police surveillance. The plan was for Cologne to call Banerjee and arrange a meeting in another hotel late in the afternoon. As planned, Banerjee arrived first. Undercover agents and Swiss police were stationed throughout the hotel dressed as staff. He waited in the bar where he was expecting Cologne's call. On cue, the phone rang. Cologne was on his way. This was the FBI's best chance to get the recording they had long awaited. To be sure Banerjee's voice was taped clearly, they hid the wire inside Cologne's outermost layer of clothing, his coat. But Cologne seemed nervous and removed his coat when he arrived. As a result, investigators could no longer hear the conversation. Years of pursuit hung in the balance. It seemed unlikely that Banerjee would agree to meet Cologne again anytime soon.
We had ourselves a major problem. So what I initially did was, since I was monitoring the conversation from the outside, I went into the doorway of the restaurant, and hopefully in Cologne's line of eyesight, and I took my jacket off a couple of times, hoping he would get the idea to put his jacket on.
Nobody's going to come back in.
Okay.
The receptionist.
But the agent couldn't get Cologne's attention.
Testimony isn't going anywhere.
The informant was apparently too nervous to look anywhere except directly at Banerjee.
The Swiss police, they came to our rescue. They went in there and they closed the whole restaurant down. They went in and talked to the owner of the manager of the restaurant, said, hey, we got a little problem. We need to shut this restaurant down. Fortunately, there weren't too many customers in there, and basically they closed the restaurant down, which forced Cologne and Banerjee to leave the restaurant.
After moving to a noisier bar in the hotel, Cologne suggested they'd be more comfortable relaxing in the room where Cologne was staying. Cologne arrived first. He was met by a Swiss technician who attempted to strip the wire from his jacket before Banerjee arrived. Cologne's device was an unnecessary risk since the room itself was wired.
We didn't know what Banerjee was going to do once the two of them were in the hotel. They had gone from a public place to strictly a private place, and we were a little concerned at this point for what Banerjee may have up his sleeve.
Undercover agents alerted the surveillance team that Banerjee had arrived on Cologne's floor. The Swiss tech retrieved the wire and stepped into the adjoining room. Cologne barely had time to pour himself a drink before there was a knock on the door. The first thing Banerjee did was check Cologne for wires. He found none and began to relax. Cologne poured him a drink. Then his old friend opened up.
Broad daylight, downtown Manhattan.
Banerjee felt comfortable enough to talk about murdering his partner. He mentioned the $25,000 he paid to commission the deed. He also made comments about the men in England that he ordered killed. He even talked to Cologne about the arsons he had paid for back in 1979. After 5.5 years and 6,000 miles from the crime scene, the FBI's perseverance had finally paid off. At last, they had it all on tape, and Cologne earned himself an early parole.
That was the coup de grace right there. That was it. We got exactly what we needed. We pretty much corroborated Cologne, down to every I, dotted I, and every T that Cologne had told us.
On September 2nd, 1993, outside his Chippendales club in Los Angeles, Steve Banerjee was arrested for racketeering and first-degree murder. Facing life in prison, Banerjee's defense team offered the state's attorneys terms for an agreement. Banerjee would plead guilty to the charges and forfeit his interest in Chippendales for consideration in sentencing. New York State accepted, suggesting 26 years in a maximum security facility. But to Banerjee, the punishment was too severe. On the day of his sentencing in October 1994, he was found hanged in his cell. Michael Geddes, the New York City detective who investigated Nick DeNoya's murder 6 years earlier, was glad to see the case closed.
Ever since Steve Banerjee was arrested and Cologne confessed, What happened is I saw that Val Denoya, the brother, and his wife actually change. You could see the peace in their face. You could see the smile coming back into their life.
Steve Banerjee had immigrated to the United States to fulfill his dreams of success. Blinded by his pursuit, he confused power and the accumulation of wealth with the American dream. An hour north of New York City, a band of deadly gunmen descended on a peaceful suburban community. They struck quickly and savagely. Agents learned that the gang's leader had been living underground for more than 2 decades. The FBI's New York Anti-Terrorist Task Force hoped they could find this most wanted fugitive before he killed again.
A series of armored car heists and bloody shootouts shocked law enforcement. The brutal violence of the crimes suggested a motive more complex than greed. When the robbers started targeting police, the FBI took charge. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would expend thousands of man-hours to stop an armed gang that terrorized New York.
Rockland County, New York, 1981. The burgeoning suburb just 20 miles north of New York City had become a refuge of former city dwellers. Most left their urban homes in pursuit of safer, more affordable neighborhoods for their families. They enjoyed more open space and lower crime rates. The town of Nyack was typical and drew many people to its new mall. At 3:40, October 20th, 1981, a Brinks armored truck made its regularly scheduled pickup from a retailer. One guard remained in the truck while another watched the doors. The third returned with cash and receipts. With no warning, a gang of masked men burst out of a red van. One guard was hit in the throat, another was hit in the arm. The gunman then trained their weapons on the driver. He shot back, but the assailant's gunfire was overwhelming. One guard managed to climb into the back of the truck for protection.
All right, Charlie, let's go.
Police Chief Alan Colsey of the South Nyack Grandview Police Department was 5 miles away when he received the call. Officers from other nearby towns were also called, since Nanuet was too small to support its own police force.
In October of 1981, when the Brinks case occurred, it was an extremely shocking event for the entire area of Rockland County. For the Nyack community, for the Clarkstown community, this was something that they had never expected to ever see.
Clarkstown police and paramedics arrived first. They placed one guard on life support, hoping he would survive the ride to the hospital. Brinks guard Peter Page would never get that chance. A gunshot had severed major arteries in his right shoulder and neck. He died before help arrived. The uninjured driver said though the gunman had worn masks, he believed they were black males. They sped off in a red van. From a deposit log, police learned that $1.6 million was missing. 1.3 million remained in the truck. Chief Colsey received updates as he raced to the crime scene.
The first information coming in from the Nyack scene was that the suspects had been seen escaping in a red van. They were eastbound on Route 59. This would take them along a route adjacent to the New York State Thruway, which leads directly into New York City over the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Moments later, a local resident close to the mall reported seeing masked gunmen in a parking lot, transferring sacks and weapons into a small moving truck. The witness told Clarkstown police that the vehicles exited eastbound. Detective Arthur Keenan and 2 other police cruisers were en Route 59, close to the Thruway entrance when they received the update.
We proceeded on to Route 59 near the New York State Thruway to see if we would see the getaway vehicle. We went to that area figuring that would be a getaway route.
When the officers arrived at the intersection of Mountain View Road and Interstate 87, they noticed a moving truck waiting to turn left onto the Thruway. Keenan ordered 1 patrol unit to block the on-ramp. Then, Detective Keenan received a call about a second moving truck.
At that time, there was a radio transmission from the Orangetown police that they had a U-Haul truck heading southbound on Route 304 near the New Jersey line, which was approximately the same distance from the Nyack Mall as we were.
Unsure if the truck on Route 59 was the suspects, Sergeant Edward O'Grady and Detective Keenan blocked the truck. Officers Brian Lennon and Waverly Chip Brown approached the drivers.
The suspects were described as being black males. At the intersection, we observed the driver and passenger as being white individuals.
Yeah.
The woman objected to the shotgun. Sergeant O'Grady directed Lennon to return the gun to the patrol car. They believed they had stopped the wrong truck.
On the boulevard westbound.
As Lennon secured the gun, the detective inspected the back of the moving truck. Though it didn't appear locked, the back door wouldn't open. He told the couple that he wanted to see what was inside.
I couldn't understand why it wouldn't open. I wanted to know what was in the back of the truck. And then instantly, as I was said that, a noise came from the truck. I turned and all the suspects were coming out of the back, shooting.
The rounds from the officers' 6-shot revolvers bounced off the bulletproof vests worn by the armed gang. Officer Lennon rushed back to his patrol car for his shotgun. Officer Brown was shot in the neck and shoulder and fell to the ground. Even if the officers were wearing their vests, it wouldn't have helped.
We were at a disadvantage. In addition to which, the ammunition that was being used in the M16 was capable of going through vests.
As the masked gunman approached, one executed Officer Brown at point-blank range. Detective Keenan was hit in the leg and ran for cover.
I was still being fired at. Even after I took cover, I had shots go between my legs. The tree that I was behind took a shot chest high.
Officer Lennon had unlocked his shotgun, but was taking heavy fire. The gunman rammed the police car, trying to clear it for their escape. It didn't work. Then, 2 cars arrived at the scene. The suspects gathered the money bags and piled into the cars. One suspect never made it to a getaway car. A passing motorist grabbed the woman who had been a passenger in the truck and prevented her escape. He watched the white Oldsmobile and tan Honda speed away. Officers Keenan and Lennon rushed to help their injured colleagues.
As the suspects made their getaway, I went to both Waverly Brown and Eddie O'Grady to see if there was anything I could do for them. Waverly Brown and Eddie were both beyond any medical attention that I could administer.
Still en route, Chief Alan Colsey's main focus now was to find the fleeing vehicles, but reports were scattered and hard to decipher.
It was very, very difficult at this particular time to get a clear, open communication from anyone out in the field back to a desk area because of the number of communications that were literally stepping on one another.
As the chief approached the area, he determined that the crime scene didn't need any more personnel or vehicles. He set out to find those responsible.
I didn't want to interfere with the emergency response in that area. The road was completely blocked. So knowing that this particular escape route would lead them in a particular direction, I made a U-turn at Mountain View and 59 and traced my steps back.
He figured the suspects would travel towards New York City, where there was potential for a greater loss of life. He believed their route would take them along Mountain View Avenue to a T intersection.
I figured there was a 50-50 shot that they were either going to go east or west, and that I could cover at least one of those avenues of escape, and went immediately to that area as quickly as I could. In fact, en route to that particular intersection, I observed the suspect vehicles, two of them, at a high rate of speed heading east on Christian Herald Road.
The chief followed the cars. He radioed in his position and asked for backup.
It was clear to me, based upon the events that had transpired up until that point, that these were extremely dangerous individuals who had no compulsion or no regard for human life and no hesitancy to take the utmost of violent actions against anybody who would stand in their way.
Until units arrived, it would be up to him to stop two vehicles that held 6 heavily armed cop killers. After following for a few minutes, the chief noticed that 2 passengers in the Honda had ducked out of sight, perhaps to load guns.
As we get to the corner of 6th and Broadway, the Oldsmobile makes a right-hand turn onto Broadway going south into the middle of town, and the tan Honda attempts to do the same, but slides, skids across the road.
The chief positioned his car between himself and the fugitives. He drew his gun and continued to call for backup, hoping his voice could be heard over the clamor of simultaneous calls.
I continually order the suspects out of the vehicle. There's a period of a few seconds where nothing in fact happens. And then the door opens up and I see a female put her feet out onto the roadway and remain seated in the front seat of the car.
The chief repeated his commands to exit the vehicle with their hands in the air. The woman then began to reach behind the seat, perhaps for a gun. Then a second occupant walked towards the officer wearing a bulletproof vest.
Despite my repeated orders to the contrary, one of the suspects came walking up towards me. The female was attempting to reach around and get something which I immediately assumed to be a weapon.
The chief was outnumbered, and neither of the suspects obeyed his orders. He made one more desperate call for backup.
Driver!
On October 20th, 1981, the Nyack, New York police chief had stopped one of 2 getaway cars filled with suspects from an armored car robbery that had left 3 dead and 2 wounded. As he continued to call for backup, one suspect reached behind her seat. Another approached the chief wearing a bulletproof vest. He was outnumbered, and neither of the suspects obeyed his orders. As the chief made one last desperate radio call, backup arrived.
What do you got? Got two. Got one in the back seat. All right, get on the ground. Face down. On the ground. Get on the ground. Face down.
They secured the scene and pulled a third suspect from the back seat. Police believed that he had been an armed lookout for the other two, but was injured and dropped his weapon when their getaway car careened out of control. Police searched the car. In the trunk, they recovered sacks that held in excess of $1 million. Under the front seat, they found a loaded 9mm pistol, the weapon the woman had likely been reaching for. Thousands attended the funeral for the officers slain at the October 20th shootout. The entire community shared the grief felt by Detective Arthur Keenan at the loss of his colleagues.
The death of my two friends, Chipper Brown and Eddie O'Grady, definitely affected my life from that point forward. When you're in a small community like that, in a small police department like that, you go to each other's weddings and christenings and barbecues and things of that nature, and it becomes like a secondary family of sorts. And so it was very devastating to lose two of your good friends.
The four murder suspects, including the woman captured at the roadblock, maintained their silence while arraigned at Nyack Village Hall. Police had no way to know how many more were still at large.
The law enforcement community in Rockland County was taken greatly by surprise by the sequence and magnitude of the events. This was really a small assault team that came to Rockland County to rob this Brinks truck, and it was a magnitude and a seriousness and a firepower that had never been seen anywhere in the law enforcement community here.
If Nyack police were not used to such violence, 30 miles south in New York City, the FBI and New York City police certainly were. The New York Joint Terrorism Task Force had already been investigating a series of armored car heists throughout the region that had been executed in a similar fashion. Now retired Special Agent Lou Vesey was a member of that team. He believed the Nyack robbery was connected to the others.
The people who had done Nyack had to have some involvement with all these other crimes. I mean, because the MO was absolutely identical. The whites were driving the vehicles, the blacks had done the robberies, the weapons that were used were identical to the weapons that had been used in the other robberies we were looking at. So there was no doubt in anybody's mind that this was at least some of the same group.
The suspects were processed at the Rockland County Jail. When asked for their names, all gave aliases, except one. Judy Clark, arrested in the getaway car, was no stranger to the FBI. To agents, she was known as a member of the Weather Underground, a radical group involved in many violent robberies and bombings in the 1960s and 70s. For the Brinks robbery, she would be sentenced to 75 years in prison. Special Agent Lou Vesey was an expert on the Weather Underground.
One female I recognized immediately as Judy Clark, who had been someone who had been under investigation previously by us as a possible terrorist. There was another female there who I thought looked very familiar.
Agent Vesey suspected the woman arrested at the roadblock was Kathy Boudin, another member of the Weather Underground. A fingerprint check confirmed it. Boudin pled guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison for acting as a decoy passenger in the moving truck. They discovered one of the men to be David Gilbert, Boudin's common-law husband, who was also a member of the Weather Underground. He received 75 years for his role. Sam Brown, who had been injured in the getaway car, was an associate of the Black Liberation Army, another militant group. Like Gilbert and Clark, Brown was sentenced to 75 years in prison. 4 members of the gang were behind bars. From survivors' statements, agents estimated at least 7 more were out on the streets. Special Agent Ken Maxwell joined the investigation to help determine who and where the remaining fugitives might be. One new lead held promise. The second getaway car had been found a few miles away.
The Oldsmobile was found in Westchester County, dumped or abandoned. Inside, there was a great deal of blood, indicating that whoever had abandoned the vehicle had been wounded during the shootout.
Agents checked local hospitals for gunshot victims. They found no patients whose whereabouts were unaccounted for on the day of the shootout.
Other cases, the bombing cases, even after.
The Oldsmobile was registered to a woman at an apartment on Prospect Street in East Orange, New Jersey. They suspected that the armed fugitives had taken refuge there. Agents obtained a search warrant. They found no one inside and began to process the apartment.
The location in East Orange, New Jersey was a treasure trove of evidence. It's what we commonly refer to as a safe house. Inside that safe house, the New Jersey State Police and the FBI located a tremendous amount of documentary evidence indicating other safe houses, other vehicles used by these subjects, and also photographs and other forms of identification that began to unravel the mystery as to who was involved.
One key name investigators discovered on rent receipts was the legal name of the tenant, Marilyn Jean Buck. The FBI knew her name and history. She was a known operative of the Black Liberation Army and its only white member.
Well, Marilyn Buck had a long history of her involvement with radical politics, if you will. At the time of the robbery, she was a fugitive who had gone underground and was wanted on weapons charges.
What is that?
Agents also found a bomb-making manual, diagrams of 6 police precincts, and a hit list naming civic and business leaders. They turned up more false IDs, disguises, a shotgun, 2 9mm pistols, and ammunition. A ledger with detailed notes made in Marilyn Buck's handwriting revealed the group's illicit activities. It listed dates and expenditures for rental cars, guns, ammunition, and illegal drugs. As investigators sifted through the evidence, they began to encounter a problem that would plague them throughout this complex case, according to Agent Lou Vesey.
I think the real difficulty is just the sheer bulk of information and evidence. Numerous pieces of evidence from numerous crime scenes, individuals who constantly used aliases, false identification, had safe houses. You had to figure out who was who. Was that person identical to a person with a different name, but a same physical description in another safe house? It was a gigantic jigsaw puzzle, and sometimes you didn't think you had all the pieces.
Agents still didn't know who was involved, where they were, and why they did it.
Mr. Brown,
to get answers, the FBI needed to develop a cooperating witness. They turned to Sam Brown in Otisville Prison, the gunman arrested after the car chase. He was a low-level associate of the Black Liberation Army. Brown cooperated in the hopes that his sentence would be lightened.
Sam Brown was the only one who decided to talk to the investigators. He really got us started. He's the one that named a few names, and with those few names, that's where the investigation began widening out to the rest of them. So he was very important.
The most valuable name Brown provided was that of the mastermind behind the armed robbery, Mutulu Shakur. Shakur was a known militant the leader of the Black Liberation Army and one of the highest-ranking members of the gang who called themselves the Family.
In case you get stopped.
The Family was a group of about a dozen terrorists, comprised primarily of members of the Weather Underground and Black Liberation Army. Their formal association was news to Agent Maxwell.
We had known from prior investigations in the past that these groups had communicated, that they had some common goals and objectives, but never before had that communication or association evolved into this type of criminal activity.
All right, well listen, Sam.
Brown told agents that the Family met on many occasions to plan the Nyack robbery. Matulu Shakur assigned jobs to each member of the group.
You know what to do with that?
Yes, sir.
Edward Joseph and Donald Weems were assigned as gunmen in the armored car assault. The FBI knew Weems was a member of the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. He had escaped from prison in 1978. Investigators knew little about Joseph. Another man named Chewy Ferguson would handle the M16 assault rifle.
Y'all ready? Y'all ready?
Samuel Lee Smith would be armed with a shotgun.
I don't want anybody to fire these weapons till Chewy says. Chewy's a weapon man, all right?
Brown didn't know the names of the others, but provided agents with physical descriptions. Agents put out APBs for the 5 names given, which included Samuel Lee Smith. In Queens, homicide detectives were on their way to Smith's last known address. A license plate registered to him had been found in a safe house. As one detective drove down Smith Street, he passed a driver who fit the suspect's description. The detective called for a marked unit to stop him. When the man saw the lights, he took off. Police followed him into an alley.
Get out of the car! Put your hands out the window! Use your left hand to open the door. Step out of the vehicle. Step out of the car. You step out of the car. Get out of the car. Step out of the car. Keep your hands back.
For the 3rd time in as many days, an armed member of the Family had opened fire on uniformed officers. Samuel Lee Smith, a fugitive wanted for his role in the shooting deaths of 2 police officers and an armored car guard, had opened fire on New York City police. His attack did not last long. He was killed by the officers returning fire. Smith was the 5th member of a terrorist group called the Family to have been taken off the streets. 7 others remained at large, with almost $1 million in stolen cash still missing. On a tip from Sam Brown, a gang member already in custody, police canvassed a Bronx neighborhood for another suspect named Donald Weems. Special Agent Ken Maxwell recalls that Brown knew very little about Weems.
Brown had given us a general description of a neighborhood in the Bronx where he had met this individual who fit the description of Weems. My partner and I, after a process of elimination and a lot of legwork, pinpointed a building that possibly could be the place Brown was talking about.
Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, hoping someone would know Weems and reveal his address. They got lucky. A neighbor directed police to his apartment. He told them Weems was upstairs right now. Detectives called for backup. Since every other encounter with these terrorists had resulted in gunfire, they prepared for the worst. In a short time, they entered the building with a warrant and a SWAT team. They had no idea if Weems was alone or if he was armed.
There were some anxious moments in terms of waiting, but then he ultimately came out and surrendered in the hallway. In his apartment, however, we found several firearms, a gas mask, a bulletproof vest, and enough ammunition to do battle with a small army.
Weems was the only member of the family inside. He was tried on federal charges and found guilty of robbery and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison. Though 6 members of the family were now in custody, group leader Matulu Shakur remained on the streets. Once again, cooperating informant Sam Brown provided agents with a lead. He believed Matulu Shakur could most likely be found in Harlem at the acupuncture clinic Shakur had founded. The FBI and NYPD set up 24-hour surveillance on the clinic.
We utilized agents and detectives of diverse ethnic backgrounds to do our best to blend into certain neighborhoods. We knew from both experience and also recognizing the intelligence and versatility of this group that we had to be particularly discreet in surveilling these individuals.
Agents watched and listened for months. Though Shakur never showed, they noted several others who came and went quite often. Agents hoped they would eventually lead them to Shakur. One night, agents followed a man from the clinic to a house at 85 Barrow Street in Greenwich Village. They learned the house was rented to Edward Joseph, one of the suspects named by informant Sam Brown in the Nyack robbery and shootout. They suspected Shakur was hiding there. They were right. Their months of perseverance had paid off. A federal judge authorized a Title III. This permitted agents to set up wiretaps and bugs. Shakur and Joseph must have suspected the FBI's presence, since they often turned up the TV when they talked. Despite this, agents were able to pick up snippets of incriminating conversations, including a discussion of killing informant Sam Brown. After several weeks, agents had enough evidence for a warrant to raid the Greenwich Village hideout. On the night of March 25, 1982, 6 months since the murders and robbery in Nyack, agents prepared for the assault. They'd strike early the next morning, hoping to catch the fugitives asleep and unaware. As the agents watched and waited, they saw Shakur enter the house. At dawn, 2 SWAT teams arrived. One team entered through the front door. The other covered the fire escape and back. They arrested 2 men, Chewy Ferguson and Edward Joseph, both named as participants in the Nyack heist. Their leader, Matulu Shakur, was nowhere to be found. Somehow, he'd escaped during the night, slipping past the surveillance. Ferguson and Joseph were convicted on federal charges as accessories for harboring a fugitive, though they were acquitted of murder charges stemming from the Nyack shootings. Both were sentenced to 12 years in prison. On July 23, 1982, almost a year after 2 officers and a guard had been killed in the Brinks robbery, Matulu Shakur was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Finding the leader of the gang responsible for 3 cold-blooded murders would now become a priority for every FBI office across the country. Almost a year after a Brinks robbery and shootout with police, FBI agents around the country continued to pursue the mastermind behind the $1 million heist. Matula Shakur, a leader of the terrorist group called The Family, had been placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Shakur and at least 3 others remained at large. In the summer of 1982, an agent from New York City traveled to Georgia to interview a member of The Family who had been arrested for a separate bank robbery. Tyrone Rison offered his cooperation in the hopes of a lighter sentence by the state of Georgia. Though he claimed that he was not present when the armored car was robbed in Nyack, New York, he confessed to having helped plan the job that left a Brinks guard and 2 police officers dead. Rison provided crucial information about other members of The Family.
Rison was not only a member of the family, he was a very important member of the family and had been involved in all the robberies. He knew who was in the family, he knew the names, and he knew how the family operated. So he was able to describe the MO, the robberies they did, the weapons they used, who did what.
Our lookouts, more or less.
Rison told the agent how members of the group were able to secure so many aliases. The prisoner explained that a manager of a children's clothing store in Manhattan was key to obtaining false IDs. The manager gathered license information each time a customer paid by check. Since New York State did not require a photo license in the early 80s, an imposter would take the information to the motor vehicles department, claiming she'd lost her license. Then, the DMV would issue a duplicate immediately. Rison also described to Special Agent Maxwell the group's motives.
They termed these robberies expropriations, almost acts of war. And as one of their members eloquently, or not so eloquently, commented one time, in war, people get hurt. So if you can understand that philosophy, you can understand the mindset or the motivation behind the gang.
Rison's information helped agents understand more about the inner workings of the group. But by the fall of 1984, 3 years after the Brinks heist and triple murder, 3 fugitives still eluded the FBI, including gang leader Matula Shakur, Marilyn Buck, and Susan Rosenberg. Despite this, time was on the side of the FBI. The longer the fugitives ran, the more likely it was they'd make a mistake. On November 29, 1984, local police received a call from a manager at a storage facility in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. He reported a customer on the premises who had been paying her bill with a credit card that was determined to be stolen.
Hello, this is Bob from Cherry Hill Storage.
Officers arrived to find the woman about to leave. Inside the back of the van, they noticed containers that appeared to hold explosives. Police asked her for ID. When she reached for her purse under the driver's seat, the cautious officers stopped her. They wanted her hands to stay in plain sight. Inside her purse, they found a weapon. They placed her under arrest. When she was processed, police learned that she was Susan Rosenberg, a member of the family, wanted in connection with the Brinks robbery and shootout. Investigators secured a search warrant for the van. Inside the crates, they found 640 pounds of explosives and 14 weapons. The van was registered in New York State to a woman named Louise Harmon. Agents discovered the name and her address had been falsified.
tag right there.
As forensic technicians processed Rosenberg's vehicle, they noticed a sticker on the door from a repair shop in Connecticut. Agents located the New Haven repair shop where the vehicle had been serviced. They hoped the owner would remember the persons who had brought the van in. They showed the owner several photographs of women who were known associates of the family. The woman he identified was Marilyn Jean Buck, one of 2 remaining fugitives in the Brinks robbery and shootout. While Buck had not used her real name on the vehicle's paperwork, she listed an address in Dobbs Ferry, New York on the repair bill. Agents followed up on the lead. They determined that Buck was in Dobbs Ferry and set up surveillance, but she eluded them for months. Then on May 11th, 1985, they finally cornered her outside a diner and arrested her. Buck denied knowing Matulu Shakur or having any connection to the Brinks robbery and shootout 4 years before.
Have a weapon up against the car.
But a federal trial would prove differently. Buck was sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
She was extremely important in the planning of the robberies and in the procurement of the weapons, as it turns out. A lot of the weapons that the family had, she obtained in gun shows in Texas, buying them under phony names.
Now, only one known suspect in the Nyack robbery and shootout remained: terrorist leader Matulu Shakur.
Do you happen to see anybody with him?
Agents searched a Baltimore apartment rented by Buck, hoping for a lead to Shakur's whereabouts. They discovered paraphernalia for making false identity papers, wigs likely used in disguises, plans to bomb federal offices, and $10,000 in cash. Searchers also found guns and ammunition stashed in various locations throughout the apartment.
And looks like another handgun.
Then, scrawled on a piece of paper, agents came across what they'd been hoping for: evidence of Matulu Shakur's whereabouts. It listed a phone number in Los Angeles. Special Agent David Mitchell spearheaded the search for Shakur. He contacted the FBI Los Angeles field office to have agents follow up the lead.
Special Agent Dana Ingalls in the Los Angeles office advised me that he had interviewed an individual that had established that Shakur had in fact been residing in Los Angeles.
Shakur had eluded authorities in a nationwide manhunt for over 5 years. Agents hoped that this time they could corner him and bring down the leader of the terrorist gang responsible for killing 1 armored car guard and 2 police officers. The FBI and NYPD were closing in on Matulu Shakur, the elusive criminal believed to have masterminded a deadly Brinks robbery and shootout. Special Agent David Mitchell had tracked Shakur to LA, where the terrorist leader remained 1 step ahead.
There were a number of challenges. Shakur was working with a group of individuals that were closely aligned to each other. They had a support network. The investigators all assigned to this investigation were having a difficult time getting individuals to cooperate.
After many weeks, investigators were finally able to convince an informant to tell what he knew about the fugitive's whereabouts. He said he didn't know where Shakur was hiding, but he identified a man by the name of Chapman, known to be close to Shakur. For about 6 weeks, agents conducted ground and air surveillance on Chapman and other Shakur associates, but Shakur continued to elude authorities.
Shakur was leading a very low-profile life in Los Angeles. at least as far as our investigation could determine. He did not frequent any locations or areas where he could be identified, and we virtually knew very little about his activity at that time.
As the surveillance continued, Mitchell and the other investigators tried to find a pattern to the moves Shakur's associates made to hide him around the city. They pored over apartment rental records and other documents, but learned little. Then on February 11th, 1986, their confidential informant called.
Hey, thanks for
He told them that Chapman would meet with Shakur that night, after Chapman left a Lakers basketball game. Investigators located his car and waited for him to leave the forum. Chapman attempted what agents call dry cleaning, counter-surveillance tactics designed to lose a tail. He wove through the streets, turning and changing direction. Police stayed with him, not knowing if Chapman had seen them. When Chapman reached his destination, Mitchell's team pulled in nearby. Chapman approached a man they believed was Shakur. Two officers headed to where the men were talking, careful not to attract attention. When Shakur saw them, he took off on foot. They caught up with him in an alley. The arrest of this violent revolutionary closed a 5-year nationwide manhunt.
When Shakur was arrested, it was apparent to those officers and agents involved in the arrest that he was tired, and it was late in the evening. He was transported to the Los Angeles FBI office, where Agent Ingalls and I attempted to interview him. Shakur declined to furnish any statement to us during this interview, and was subsequently removed back to New York City to face the charges.
In the spring of 1986, Shakur was tried on federal charges related to the Brinks robbery and shootout. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The police officers who survived that terrifying day in Nyack, New York, were relieved that Shakur had been brought to justice. But for South Nyack Police Chief Alan Colsey, the memory of their loss would always be with them.
Eddie O'Grady and Officer Brown, Chip Brown as we called him, we're local Nyack community members. They'd gone through the Nyack school district. They had been on the job before I was, and in fact, more or less had sort of brought me and broken me into the community. They were very, very close to the community and to a lot of us that were police officers here. They were excellent people. They were excellent cops, and we miss them dearly to this day.
To commemorate the slain officers, a monument was erected in Nyack, New York. The surviving colleagues have found some comfort in knowing that the lessons learned from the Nyack shootout have made life safer for citizens, as well as for the officers on the street today.
Let it not be said that they died in vain, but rather that their ultimate sacrifice led to the identification of a national problem. I think their ultimate sacrifice and the tragic deaths of everyone involved certainly uncovered a nationwide network of domestic terrorists heretofore unknown. and in essence prevented the loss of life to others.
In California, detectives investigated a gruesome murder. The suspect fled and was eventually caught in Arizona. His confinement didn't last long. He escaped and disappeared into the Grand Canyon, robbing and kidnapping tourists as he went. To stop the elusive killer, FBI agents and local officers joined forces on a dangerous manhunt.
A killer was on the loose in one of America's most popular tourist destinations. Armed and desperate, he evaded law enforcement at every turn. As the 4th of July weekend quickly approached, thousands of people became potential targets. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents would use any means necessary to track a killer before he could strike again.
In the early morning hours of September 20th, 1990, a fisherman cast a line into the Burns Cut River near Stockton, California. He felt a tug and reeled in something heavy. It was a large plastic bag. Inside, he found a human leg. The fisherman called the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office.
Find anything else out there?
Deputies responded to the scene immediately. They confirmed the report of human remains and could find no clue as to the victim's identity. The deputies called in Homicide Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya, who would run the investigation.
The search of the river for any other items of evidence and body parts continued through the night and then into the next morning. We were able to get a boat unit out to the river along with a search of the banks by detectives.
By first light, the deputies were dragging the river. While they checked the deeper water, detectives walked the riverbank. It wasn't long before they discovered another plastic bag. Inside were 2 arms. The wrists were bound together with masking tape.
Hold it, hold it.
Nearby, the boat unit deputies soon pulled up another object. It was a human torso wrapped in a sheet. Later, they would find a right leg, the victim's head, and some clothing, all in separate plastic bags.
74.
After several hours of searching, investigators had recovered an entire male body. They didn't know who the man was.
pretty brutal murder case. And for someone to take the time to dismember a person and to transport that person in different bags and dispose of the body without caring, it's very callous and cold.
At the morgue, a coroner examined the remains. He determined that the victim had been dismembered with a serrated knife. It would take more time to determine the actual cause of death, or if the man was alive when he was dismembered. Detectives searched the clothing and found a wallet containing a California driver's license. It belonged to 40-year-old Sam Lee McCullough of Stockton. Police records showed McCullough had a minor arrest record. A fingerprint check confirmed his identity. After informing McCullough's family of his death, detectives got permission to check his house for evidence.
Once the victim was identified and we had a name and a location where he lived, we responded to the victim's address. He lived in the 5200 block of East Mariposa Road in South Stockton.
They arranged to meet Sam McCullough's girlfriend at his home.
Someone is missing?
She had reported McCullough missing earlier that day. Since he hadn't called her in several days, she checked McCullough's house and saw that the place was in disarray. Many items were missing, including his white Jeep Cherokee. Also missing were 2 shotguns, a revolver, and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Detectives and deputies examined McCullough's house. Noting footprints on the floor, they conducted an electrostatic search to reveal details of the prints, which appeared to be made by boots. Investigators also recovered latent fingerprints, but none were foreign to the house. If the murder occurred in the house, the killer had removed any obvious evidence.
A homicide of this nature, you would expect to find blood just all over the place, stains. The person that was involved in this case took a lot of time to clean and hide his tracks in this case.
In the bathroom, a deputy made an important discovery.
We were just about ready to leave when we ran a flashlight through the tub area, and we saw a reflection come from the drain area.
It looked like the sparkle from a sequin. The investigators knew it was collagen, a substance in bones that has a particularly reflective quality.
Looking a little deeper into the drain, we found blood, tissue, and bone, and a large amount of hair. And based on that, there was a great probability at that point that the victim had been dismembered in the bathtub of the residence.
Keep going over here. Stay closer.
Laboratory tests would later match the blood and hair to Sam McCullough. Eventually, the coroner determined McCullough had been dead before he was dismembered. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the forehead.
What caliber do you think it is, Doctor?
Powder burns indicated he had been shot at point-blank range. The coroner removed the bullet fragments and sent them to the state ballistics lab. Examiners there studied the size, weight, and composition of the fragments, determining that the murder weapon was a .22 caliber rifle. Comparing the fragments to slugs test-fired from sample weapons can identify specific models. California Department of Justice examiners believe the weapon used was probably a Western Field brand rifle. Detectives found documents listing the serial numbers of McCullough's Jeep and his guns. They entered the numbers into the National Crime Information Center. The NCIC is a nationwide database used by law enforcement agencies to track criminals, missing persons, and stolen property. If the items turned up anywhere, San Joaquin detectives would be notified. Within days, a Stockton police officer discovered the victim's Jeep abandoned several miles from McCullough's house. Yet an examination yielded no additional clues. Investigators still had no leads on the killer. They canvassed McCullough's neighborhood, hoping to find a witness. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. But one neighbor recalled that McCullough had been robbed 2 years earlier. Police records confirmed the story.
In doing a name search, we uncovered a report listing the suspect as being a Stephen Horning. In that case, Stephen had apparently, according to the victim, robbed the victim at gunpoint.
It was the first solid lead. Stephen Horning wasn't at his last known address, so detectives tracked down his older brother, who was a campus police officer at a nearby college. He told detectives that Stephen was one of 5 brothers and was especially close to one brother, Danny Ray Horning. Stephen and Danny spent a lot of time together. They often hunted and fished along the Burns Cut River, the same river where McCullough's body had been dumped. He told the detectives about one particular hunting trip Stephen and Danny had taken.
They had shot a deer, brought it home, and butchered the deer in the bathtub of the residence. And that was significant to us, as the victim had been dismembered in the same way.
Okay.
The eldest Horning brother added another detail familiar to detectives. After butchering the deer, Danny had placed the animal's limbs in black plastic garbage bags. Detectives thought the story had an eerie resemblance to the homicide of Sam McCullough. They asked the brother to identify some clothing found in a bag containing body parts in the Burns Cut River. He said that the black shorts and t-shirt looked like those his brother Danny often wore. Police noted that no one in the Horning family had seen Stephen or Danny since September 19th, the day Sam McCullough was probably killed.
The investigation progressed to the point where there was enough probable cause to present the case to a judge, and a search warrant was issued for Stephen and Danny, along with an arrest warrant.
On November 20th, 1990, 2 months after the murder, San Joaquin sheriff's officers returned to the brothers' trailer located behind their parents' house. No one was inside, so detectives searched the surrounding area. Behind the trailer, they found important evidence. A cut stock and a sawed-off barrel from a rifle. Lab examiners had reported that the weapon used to kill McCullough was probably a Western Field brand .22 caliber rifle.
The barrel found in the field next to the suspect's house was a Western Field .22 caliber barrel.
The next day, deputies went back to the trailer. One of the brothers, Stephen Horning, was there. He was arrested and charged with murder. The second suspect, Stephen's brother, Danny Ray Horning, was nowhere to be found.
Sit down here, watch your name.
At the San Joaquin, California County Jail in December of 1990, detectives held one suspect in the murder and dismemberment of Sam McCullough. Stephen Horning had been arrested after a month-long investigation, but detectives needed more evidence to hold him. His brother, Danny Ray Horning, was also wanted but had fled the area. Stephen swore he had nothing to do with the murder and said he didn't know where Danny was. Since Stephen wouldn't help them locate Danny, the investigators turned to the Horning's father for answers. Mr. Horning offered valuable information regarding the possible murder weapon to Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya.
After speaking with the suspect Danny's father, I learned that that Danny had been seen with a sawed-off .22 rifle.
Their father said Danny and Stephen had been behind the trailer when Danny shot a dog with the .22. Then Stephen fired at it with a crossbow. Mr. Horning believed his sons had buried the dog in the field behind the trailer. Investigators searched the Horning's yard. They noticed one area seemed to be covered with freshly dug earth and began to excavate.
The dog was found, and a search of the dog by another detective found a bullet in the brain.
The bullet was processed at the state ballistics lab. Examiners determined that the dog was killed with a Western Field .22 caliber rifle. The same model had been used to murder Sam McCullough. The technician compared the bullet from the dog to the one that had killed McCullough. The tests indicated it was likely that both bullets were fired from the same weapon. Detectives returned to the county jail and confronted Stephen Horning. They described the damaging ballistics evidence, explaining that the bullet from the dog was consistent with the bullet that killed Sam McCullough, and that his brother Danny had been seen with a Western Field .22. Realizing the case against them was strong, Stephen decided to cooperate. He claimed Danny had been in on the first robbery of McCullough 2 years earlier. Danny had vowed to kill McCullough for pressing charges, but then he went to prison for child molestation. When he got out a few months before McCullough's death, Danny had mentioned going back to rob McCullough again. Since no physical evidence implicated Stephen in Sam McCullough's death, investigators dropped the murder charge against him. They needed to find his brother, but Danny Ray Horning had disappeared. For 6 months, Detective Sergeant Armando Mayoya worked the case but found no new leads. Then, on March 22, 1991, he was contacted by authorities in Winslow, Arizona about Horning.
Well, I received a phone call from Winslow Police Department, and they informed me that he had been arrested in a bank robbery.
That day, Horning had walked into the Valley National Bank in Winslow, more than 800 miles east of Stockton, California. He trained his 9mm pistol on the bank manager while a teller filled a bag with $25,000. When she was in the other room, the teller had tripped a silent alarm. A block away at the Winslow Police Department, Detective Elmer Hassey took the call.
Under the concealment of the unmarked car, I had plenty of cover. Positioned myself to where I could try to see what was going on in the bank.
He couldn't see from the vehicle, so he went for a closer look. When the detective checked through the window, he saw a single gunman backing toward the door with a hostage.
It came through the door. I stuck the gun up to his rib cage and pulled him towards the wall and took the bank bag out of his hand.
The suspect was carrying a 9mm pistol. Detective Hassey determined the suspect's name was Danny Ray Horning. An NCIC check revealed the murder warrant in California. Hassey described the weapon recovered to Detective Mayoya.
They informed me that they had in their possession a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. They gave me the serial number, and I confirmed that number as being the weapon that was taken from the victim McCullough's residence.
In Arizona, Horning was convicted of armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. At trial, he dared a judge to give him the stiffest sentence possible, vowing to escape within a year. The judge accepted the challenge and gave Horning 4 life sentences. California authorities decided not to extradite Horning, who would serve his time at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. On May 12, 1992, prison officers doing the 4 o'clock head count found that prisoner number 85897 was not in his cell. The prison was locked down and thoroughly searched. But Danny Ray Horning was nowhere to be found. The convicted felon and suspected killer was on the run. On May 12, 1992, outside the Arizona State Prison in Florence, a massive manhunt began for escapee Danny Ray Horning, who had been serving 4 life sentences. Horning was also a suspect in a gruesome dismemberment in California. Arizona Department of Corrections fugitive investigator Doug Schuster helped organize the search.
We have a lot of expert trackers, dogs, vehicles, equipment. The plan was to track him and apprehend him. We were planning to sight him, pick up a trail, follow him with dogs, horses, men, and locate him.
Law enforcement teams from local, state, and federal agencies responded outside the prison. But Horning had disappeared from the immediate area. While the teams widened their circle, Schuster returned to the prison to try to figure out how the accused killer managed to escape. Prison officials contacted the FBI to assist in the investigation. Authorities first checked Horning's records. The convicted felon had been housed in Central Unit, the prison's most secure area. There was no evidence that he had tunneled out or otherwise breached the walls of Central. They interviewed corrections officers and inmates to determine Horning's last actions inside. Doug Schuster first determined why Horning wasn't in his locked cell.
At any given time, not all inmates are locked in a cell. Some are out at work sites, some are working in the kitchen, some are working here and there. So you have a portion of your inmates that are supposed to be in their cells. Another portion would be accounted for via an out count sheet. Staff would visually see someone and say, these 4 inmates are in the kitchen working. So they wouldn't be in their cell during the count.
Investigators learned that Horning had been assigned a janitorial job, which included cleaning the infirmary. This gave him access to medical uniforms.
Well, he was able to obtain the white lab coat from the medical unit located inside the prison here. He was able to get a pair of white pants from the workers in the kitchen.
Investigators believed Horning exchanged his prison uniform for the lab coat, white pants, and a forged employee ID. They believed that he simply walked out of the prison and just a few miles into the town of Florence. Investigators looked over Horning's record to try and determine where he might go. One possible destination was California, where Horning had family and connections. The other was Winslow, Arizona, where Horning had vowed to get even with the cops and FBI agents who had sent him to prison. Special Agent Keith Tolhurst of the FBI's Phoenix Field Office joined the investigation.
Are you going up there with him? Are you going to take dog teams up there?
He would work closely with the Department of Corrections to stop Horning before he struck again.
The information from the prison told us that they believed he was going to rob some more banks and then go to Winslow and try to kill either the Valley National Bank people that he robbed the bank from or kill the agents. So we believed he was going to head that direction.
The agent examined the items left in Horning's cell. They would be sent to profilers at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia.
We started getting involved with our behavioral science unit as well to see if they could profile this guy to find out whether he's the type of individual that would carry out his threats. And basically it came back later that it looked like he would be able, or at least capable, of carrying out those kind of threats.
If Horning was willing to kill FBI agents, no one was safe. The first solid lead in the hunt for Horning came 3 days after his escape. On May 15th, Pinal County Sheriff's deputies responded to a ranch house 15 miles west of the prison. The owner said the house had been burglarized. He said clothes, a pair of binoculars, and food were taken from his house. Also missing were several loaded guns. The FBI and local deputies believed it was Horning, stocking up for his bid to seek revenge. They were right.
And they found a fingerprint of his at the house to confirm that it was him that had done that. So now we're a little more concerned even that he was headed in the direction that he had said because he was starting to try to carry out his plan.
Good afternoon. We're holding this press conference.
The fugitive was now armed. The FBI turned to the media to warn the public and to solicit their help. At a news conference, agents released Horning's photo and information about his escape. Anyone spotting Horning was asked to call the FBI immediately, though they were instructed not to approach the suspected killer. The media coverage generated many leads. One came into the FBI from campers, claiming that Horning was stealing food, maps, and camping gear near Lake Mormon, about 170 miles north of the prison. Even though Horning knew how to hunt and fish, the burglaries were essential to his survival in the woods. Local officers followed his trail.
He'd break into cabins, he'd steal food, and then he'd move on. And what we ended up trying to do was a house-to-house search of all the cabins in the area. That was something that was going to be done by the local county sheriff offices, and they were searching as many houses as they could.
Horning was getting closer to the Grand Canyon National Park. The summer tourist season was beginning, which meant thousands of people would be in danger. They had to find him before anyone got hurt. Based on Horning's trail north, fugitive response teams from the Arizona Department of Corrections and Sheriff's Departments focused their search in Coconino County. It was an enormous undertaking. Coconino County consists of over 18,000 acres of woods and difficult terrain. Perfect cover for a fugitive.
We're in the mountains. It was Lake Mormon area. It was trees, mountains, rocks, hills, helicopters, massive amount of mobilization, radios, dogs, horses, trailers. It was just massive.
On June 3rd, 1992, a National Forest Service officer was patrolling a campground in Coconino County. The officer spotted Horning walking out of a wooded area. It was too dangerous for a lone officer to follow the armed killer into the forest.
Where he blew past the
When reinforcements arrived, Danny Ray Horning had disappeared once again. The deadly fugitive was still on the loose. In the summer of 1992, Danny Ray Horning escaped from prison in Florence, Arizona after serving only 9 months of 4 life sentences. The FBI believed the suspected killer was heading north towards Winslow, Arizona, to seek revenge on agents who had locked him away. On June 11th, agents responded to a report of a cabin burglary near the town of Pine, midway between the prison and Winslow. This time, Horning stole a truck and tried to establish himself as an outlaw celebrity, according to FBI Special Agent Keith Tolhurst.
More guns were stolen from there, and then that's where he left a note that said, you know, thank you for the items, Danny Ray, and trying to make his folk hero name known, I guess.
When the story hit the news, investigators worried the public might not realize how deadly Horning was. They knew he had likely dismembered a man in California. Now Horning had a vehicle, was armed, and was nearing the Grand Canyon National Park as tens of thousands of tourists were beginning their vacations. For 10 days, no new sightings came in. With the truck, he might have been hundreds of miles away already. Then, on June 21st, a Department of Public Safety officer spotted the stolen truck 50 miles north of Pine. Danny Ray Horning was driving. The officer called for backup. Before other officers could respond, Horning jumped from the truck, then fled on foot into the now familiar cover of the woods. FBI agents responded immediately. In the truck, they found another note signed by Horning.
It looks like you left in a hurry and left that.
Pine, Arizona is again up in a wooded area. in northern Arizona, and it's along the path. If you're going from Florence up to Pine, he's almost to Winslow. So he's getting a lot closer to the area that we were concerned about. And again, we knew he had weapons, we knew he had the vehicle, he got up into that area, and it made us believe even more that he was going to try to carry out his threats.
Authorities in Winslow weren't the only ones in danger. The FBI established a field command post inside Grand Canyon National Park, where Horning was a threat to thousands of tourists. They tracked confirmed sightings, plotting out Horning's movements. Agents coordinated the response to each sighting and relayed information between the many law enforcement agencies involved. The territory being searched was vast, and Horning was moving quickly. On June 23rd, 2 tourists reported to agents that Horning had carjacked them inside the national park. The couple said they were in a parking lot the day before when Horning commandeered their car at gunpoint. He demanded that they drive him to the canyon's rim. He checked into a hotel room there and forced his captives inside.
Okay, you two. Quiet.
His gun prevented them from calling for help.
You understand me?
The couple feared he might shoot them at any moment.
You to release my brother.
Horning recorded a message for authorities.
And I need a guarantee.
He demanded that the search for him be called off.
For the next 3 days.
He also ordered the release of one of his brothers from prison and $1 million ransom for the release of a family that he planned to kidnap in exchange for the childless couple. The next day, Horning forced the couple to drive him to a store where he purchased camping gear, new clothing, and food. But before he found a family with children to kidnap, a Forest Service officer recognized him and began following the car.
No, let's go, move it!
Horning fired at the officer, causing him to slow down. He forced the driver to speed up.
Move it! Shut up! Let's go!
When he had gained some distance, Horning ordered the car stopped.
Thanks.
He jumped out and fled on foot. Since he shot at a law officer, it was clear Horning was becoming desperate and more dangerous.
We had information that he'd vowed not to be taken alive. He was on this vendetta against the FBI and Valley National Bank, and that he had already been in a shooting with the Forest Service. So we were very cautious as far as going to the woods, which we couldn't just go running after him as fast as he may have been running, which is one of the ways he got some advance time on us.
It was really scary. You should really catch
The kidnapped couple provided agents with information about Horning's new clothes and plan. Once again, armed search parties scoured the area where Horning was last seen, but found no trace of him. Horning was back on foot and hiding out somewhere in the immense Grand Canyon National Park. He had vowed to kidnap a family with children.
Come on, guys, let's go.
To stop him, the FBI brought in their elite hostage rescue team, known as the HRT. The HRT agents blanketed the area, rappelling into the canyon, checking caves and conducting aerial searches. They had to find the suspected killer before he had the chance to kill again. Search teams from the FBI, the Arizona Department of Corrections, and local sheriff's departments trailed fugitive Danny Ray Horning through Grand Canyon National Park. They mobilized dozens of officers, tracking dogs, and helicopters in the effort to find Horning before he kidnapped more hostages. But the accused killer could have been anywhere in the immense park's 1.2 million acres. Because of the danger Horning presented to tourists, the FBI decided to close the Grand Canyon National Park for the July 4th weekend. It was a major undertaking. The holiday is the park's busiest weekend of the year. It was also the first time in the park's 73-year history that it had been closed due to a criminal threat. But Horning was dangerous enough to warrant the extreme action, according to FBI Special Agent Keith Tolhurst.
He was moving around inside the canyon, and we couldn't control that because there was too many people in the canyon. So we were going to try to start getting everybody through the roadblocks and try to find him.
New visitors were turned away, and those already in the park were asked to leave. Police set up roadblocks at entry and exit points around the Grand Canyon. They searched vehicles and informed motorists of Horning. But they didn't stop him in time. On July 4th, 2 British tourists were preparing to leave the park when an armed man approached them. They knew it was Danny Ray Horning, though he no longer looked like the photos in news reports. He was much thinner, had blonde hair, and was clean-shaven. Since the park had been locked down, the women were Horning's only way out. At a roadblock, a ranger stopped the car and spoke to the 3 inside. Horning had threatened to kill the women if they tipped off anyone.
I know you guys all know each other.
The kidnapped women had to act calm as Horning sat with a gun trained on them. The officer didn't recognize the blonde-haired Horning and let them through. Once they were out of the park, he forced them to drive 60 miles south to Williams, Arizona. When they were far from the police in the Grand Canyon, Horning ordered them to stop the car. Brandishing his gun, he marched the terrified women into the cover of the woods. The women believed that Horning was taking them there to execute them. To their relief, he left them there, fleeing in their car. The women managed to free themselves and ran to a store. A clerk there called authorities and was told an officer was nearby. The women were badly shaken but unharmed.
Lady, are you okay? For me.
They provided police with updated information about Horning, including his new look and his getaway vehicle.
We had put a description of the car out that the women had stolen from them, and a DPS officer spotted that car going from the Grand Canyon towards Phoenix.
Highway Patrolman Stephen Costello works for the Arizona Department of Safety. When Horning drove past, he began following the armed fugitive. It wasn't long before it became more than a car chase.
I hear a great big old bang, and I thought it was something wrong with the car. I looked at the gauges, all as well. At that particular time, I realized I'd been shot at, and I notified my dispatcher at that time that I'd been shot at, that I was all right, and I was going to follow him.
The gunfire forced the patrolman to keep his distance.
He's going to be taking the ramp at...
But he knew he couldn't lose Horning.
17.
The fugitive tried to make a getaway by turning off near the town of Sedona.
He takes the ramp, and I could see that he slammed on the brakes, and he skids in, and he has a slight accident is what he does. He hits a sign. I shouted out, you know, you better stop.
The shot missed. The officer had orders not to follow Horning into the woods. When backup arrived, agents and officers began a grid search of the area. Again, Horning couldn't be found. After nightfall, a lead was called into the command post. A resident said he saw Horning drinking from a garden hose in a neighborhood near Sedona. A Border Patrol agent responded to the call. As far as anyone knew, Horning was still armed. This time, there was no shootout. After being relentlessly pursued for 54 days and over hundreds of miles, an exhausted Horning simply gave up.
No doubt in my mind that because of the efforts of the teams that had been chasing him, that they had basically run him into the ground. He was laying there, dog-tired with his tongue hanging out, and for a man who still had his weapon on him and vowed not to be taken alive, all he wanted was a glass of water.
Danny Ray Horning earned 6 more years for his actions during his violent flight. Authorities in California decided to extradite Horning and charge him with the murder of Sam McCullough. His trial began on May 12, 1994. Prosecuting attorneys proved that in September of 1990, Danny Horning broke into Sam McCullough's house to rob him. Horning was angry that McCullough had pressed charges after an earlier robbery. He bound McCullough, rendering him helpless. Horning was using his sawed-off .22 caliber Western field rifle, the same one witnesses had seen him kill a dog with earlier. At point-blank range, Horning fired one shot at Sam McCullough. Minute blood spatter, as well as the human tissue found in the drain, indicated Horning had likely dismembered the victim in his tub. Then he dumped the body parts into the Burns Cut River. On July 15, 1994, about 4 years after the death of Sam McCullough, a California jury found Horning guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. Danny Ray Horning was sent to San Quentin Prison. He remains locked down in the maximum security of death row.